Welcome, everyone. I'm Ted Earhart. Today, I'm going to talk about a topic that I typically avoid at all costs, and that's politics. But we're going to talk a little bit about political history, so we're not going to get too much into current events. But that being said, if you saw the first presidential debate most recently, I think you'll agree with me that this is an election unlike anything we've ever seen. That being said, one of the big concerns that is being increasingly expressed and written about is the fact that we may have a contested election. There may be, or some big dispute about who the winner actually is. One of the concerns, of course, is we're going to see record amounts of mail-in voting, so we might not even know who the winner is for days or potentially weeks after election day itself. And of course, there's already all kinds of posturing going on around that and accusations being thrown about as we speak. So many people are worried about this. But I actually want to talk about an election that probably nobody watching this actually remembers. I certainly didn't know anything about it, but I'm currently reading a biography on J.P. Morgan, as in the namesake of the J.P. Morgan J.P. Morgan Chase Bank. And anyway, Morgan, was kind of in his prime in the late 1800s, and I'm at a point in the book. It's 1876, and Morgan is actually overseas, but there's about a half a page on what's happening in the United States at that time. And in the fall of 1876, it turns out most historians consider this presidential election the most controversial in American history. And it's just amazing to me that no one's ever even heard of it. I certainly had. But anyway, here's what happened is we had these two candidates, which you can see pictured on the right, Rutherford B. Hayes and Samuel Tilden. And Tilden actually won the popular vote that year. He won over 50% of the votes, but he only had 184 of the electoral college votes, and 185 were required to win that year. Hayes only had 165, but there was this balance of about 20 electoral college votes hanging out there that both sides claimed to have won. So it was disputed. And you got to remember that this is 1876. We're only about 10 years out from the Civil War. So that adds a whole bunch of wrinkles. African Americans, for example, had only somewhat recently earned the right to vote via a constitutional amendment. And therefore, there was lots of shenanigans in the southern states. There was lots of instances of voter suppression, and there were also instances where there were lots of illiterate voters at that time. So it's been written that there were cases where ballots were manipulated so that people who couldn't read would be confused and would end up voting one way or the other, depending on who was doing the manipulating and so forth. So there were all kinds of these crazy shenanigans going on. Long story short, what ultimately happened is Congress had to decide who was going to be the victor of this 1876 election. And they put together a commission. It was split between the two political parties, and there was also some Supreme Court justices. It was a panel of 15. And they literally did not reach a decision until 2 days before the January inauguration, and it came down to a party line split vote, and Hayes was ultimately determined to be the winner. So just imagine that. Between the November election and the January inauguration, I mean, months go by, all kinds of this shenanigans and fighting and etc. Reading this, my jaw absolutely dropped, and I've subsequently read a lot more about it. And I wanted to share it with you today because, it's just it's an amazing example of how we're really concerned about this occurring this year, and we've actually seen it in our own history. And I think very few Americans even know about it. I certainly didn't, and I haven't really read about. Nobody is talking about this in any of the media sources that I follow on a regular basis. So check that out. I think you'll find it interesting. I'll finish up by just talking about the financial markets and how this might impact them if we do have a disputed election come November. The most important thing to think about with this is you have to remember that financial markets are always pricing in new information on a day-to-day basis. And the one thing that actually kind of makes me less concerned about a disputed election impacting the financial markets is the fact that so many people are already talking about it. It's becoming more and more of a base case scenario. So my point is, like, if it actually does happen, chances are the financial markets will already have largely priced this into asset prices, which means any volatility we experience, would be less, in comparison to some type of an event that just hit, out of nowhere, like a September 11th, for example, or even this pandemic, which came on kind of out of nowhere earlier this year. So those are a couple thoughts. I know politics aren't everybody's minds today, but I think do yourself a favor if you're wondering kind of how this has played out before. You can get a lot of insight by reading about the 1876 election. So as always, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.